Hello, hello. Good morning. Can you see me? I see that there is just one person connected. Two people. Okay. Still a bit early. Let's wait for 3 minutes and then we'll get started. How are you coping with the isolation? Is it being difficult? Is it being tough? Hope not. I try to look at the bright side of things, working at home, um, having more contact with family, that type of thing. So I guess this is what we have to do now. 5 people now. 6. Not much, but it's coming. Is the volume of my voice okay, or you need me to pump it up? From list A. And one question from list B. So I repeat that in case there was an interruption. I said I had a message telling me that the signal was unstable. So I'll repeat that. I remind you that the instructions state very clearly that you have to answer one question from list A and one question from list B. The reason for me telling that is because some of you, some students, in for the midterm, they answered all of the questions of one list, or just one question in one list, or two questions from one list. Those are clearly not the instructions that you have to make sure that you choose one question from each list when you're writing your answers. And the reason for that is very simple. They are pertaining to different units in our course. So the assignment and the midterm, for that matter, have the objective of determining whether you have followed the reasoning, made the readings, understood what was being discussed, and and they have to be from different units. Is that clear? Please let me know if um, there are any questions. I am having a message that says unable to connect to chat. So let me send you a message, see if you are getting it. Well, apparently it went through, so if anyone can send me a reply, that would be awesome. Okay, so while we wait, let me start with today's lecture. The discussion that we're going to have today is about another concept that is very popular, very useful in comparative politics, and that is the concept of ideology. The concept of ideology is similar to the concept of nationalism that we already discussed before, in that sense that it is not material reality, it is not an institution either, um, but it is describing or referring to a series of ideas, mental perceptions, mental overviews about politics that we may have in our heads and that collectively taken have an impact over politics, right? And this impact has been historically very important, and that is why it is necessary to consider that as one of the major concepts used in comparative politics. And, you know, many researchers in the practice of political science have used this concept as a major um, articulator for comparative research. So I'm going to base my comments on the two readings assigned for this unit, the textbook, the chapter in the textbook, chapter 15, Ideology and Religion in Modern Politics, and also the introduction to the book written by Alain Noël and Jean-Philippe Terrien. Um, and I'm going also to present one example that is available online, so you can see how exactly this concept is used in specific study of comparative politics. So, as usual, we're going to start with definitions. So, a definition of ideology is contained in our textbook, page 351. Uh, on the margin, we can read the following. Ideology, a systematically coordinated and cognitively salient set of beliefs focused on politics. So let's be a bit more specific, elaborate a little bit on this definition because it is quite important. The definition is an organized set of thoughts, of beliefs, of values that have an impact on politics that are related to the political world. And there's a set of values, there's mental representations that we have in our minds, uh, influence politics, influence our action, our involvement, our opinions in politics, either if we are not aware of that. I mean, we all have an ideology, we all have a perspective, a way to interpret the political world. Some of us are more aware, more conscious of what that ideology implies. What is the starting point? What is the what are the consequences, and therefore the type of policies that our beliefs inform. And some people just assume that they are, building from common sense. But this common sense, of course, is a very tricky term because it is usually uh, a substitute. Calling something common sense is a substitute for an unacknowledged or unknown ideology that we have in our minds. Uh, so, to be more precise, there is another author, Ian Mackenzie, that provides a more kind of comprehensive definition. By ideology, he means the beliefs and value systems that are optional in a given society. That is to say, not expected to be shared by the whole population in a country. So, in this sense, ideologies are different from nationalism or identity that are supposed to be shared by everyone in a given country, in a given social community. That is, as we discussed already with Essence lecture, with Migdal's reading, they are like the cement that binds the community together. Ideologies are not like that. Ideologies are optional. This is what distinguishes them from those other value-based systems that we discussed before. They are actually an expression of the diversity that we might find in a given society, the diversity of point of view, and therefore ideologies are intrinsic to democracy. When we find ideologies flourishing, different points of view, different interpretations of what politics should be about, we are in presence of a flourishing democracy, because in countries that restrict ideology, restrict alternative points of view, chances are that everything is controlled from the center. There is an orthodoxy, a certain adherence to specific values that is expected from everyone, and therefore this is not particularly democratic. So ideologies quite often offer to us contrasting interpretations about contested concepts. You know, from different ideological perspective, from different ideologies, we can give different meanings to the same concepts that are very value loaded, such as liberty, right? The meaning of liberty for someone who is libertarian is not the same as the meaning of liberty for someone who is communist, right? Because what they mean by that is, in the first case, a libertarian is the ability or the freedom of people to do whatever they want without uh, control or direction from the state. Whereas for a communist, it is the state that represents the common will, and therefore um, communism uh, believes that the individual will or the individual freedom must be limited, must be constrained by the needs of the community, the needs of the whole. And the same thing happens with other concepts such as equality, such as democracy, such as rights, such as justice, such as a good society. So these terms that are value loaded, as I said, are interpreted in different ways um, by um, different ideologies. Okay, let me pause for a little bit. I don't know why I'm not being able to get any of your comments. I only get this message, unable to connect to chat. Please try again later. I'm trying to fix that. Pop out chat. Oh, yes. Okay. I opened an option that is called pop out chat, and I got a message from Danielle, from Scarlett, from Ryan, and from Jason. Great. So I'm going to leave this window open here so you can keep sending comments if you need to and if you want to. So there you go. The idea of ideology is that they are optional beliefs that are uh, creating kind of a mental template, a mental overview for the interpretation of politics. Now, I'm going to show you kind of a simple graph that I created in order to um, kind of organize our discussion, the discussion of the different ideologies that we're going to talk about here today. So I'm going to leave it on the screen for a little while so you can have the time to copy it, to take a picture or something, because I'm going to refer to that diagram in the coming minutes. So the diagram is very simple. It is it organizes different types of ideologies along horizontal continuum. On the left is the left, on the right is the right, and we find different ideologies that are placed in those positions, um, closer to the left or closer to the right. The first and the more remarkable ideology there is liberalism, that sits in the middle of those two extremes. Then we find socialism, that is on the left side of the continuum, and then we find fascism, that is on the right side of the continuum. But we also find kind of intermediate ideologies that are in between those two extremes. Um, in between socialism and liberalism, we find social democracy. In between fascism and liberalism, we find conservatism, neoliberalism, and Christian democracy. So hopefully you already had time to take a picture or write it down, uh, so I can start explaining a little bit what each one of these labels implies. Okay, now please open eClass, even if you don't see my face anymore, because I just posted um, a series of slides that are called Left Right Neoliberalism. Uh, and I'm going to be basing my following comments on those slides. The slides are strongly inspired on the reading that is assigned the Terrien and the Noel and Terrien reading. Can you see me even if I sort of make small the Ryan wrote, when I try to open the file you attach any class, it says there is no app associated with it. Oh, okay. I used the app that is called Keynote. This is an Apple-based slideshow similar to PowerPoint. So those of you who don't have a Macintosh might have a problem opening it. Let's see, what can I do? Okay, I don't know how to fix that right away, but I'm gonna try to save it in a different format. So you can see it later. Anyway, so how to differentiate the right from the left? And again, I am inspiring my comments. Scarlett, any chance you can upload it as a PDF? Let me see. No. Okay, PDF. Apparently it is working. Let me see. Oh, yes. Thank you, Scarlett. That was the solution. PDF is the thing. So I'm going to upload it right away. So people who don't have access to this Mac-based software can see it anyway. So add an activity or resource. Ideologies PDF. All right, it's there. Yeah, Justina, yours is working because you're probably using a Mac. And Scarlett just said it is working. So great. Sorry about the glitch, but I'm not the most a capable person with software, especially some of the things that I've never tried before. But I'm doing what I can. Anyway, going back to our main topic, now that you can open it either as a slide presentation or as PDF, how to differentiate the right from the left. So the major um, uh, extremes of our of the scheme that I showed. Both the right and the left believe in equality. This is what Noel and Terrien write. However, they understand equality in a very different way. The right understands equality as being um, the ability that is giving, the opportunity that is given to each individual to prove her value and reap the benefits of her salience, whereas the left sees equality as a substantive result of social interaction, right? What do I mean by that? What I mean is that the right is going to insist on uh, uh, that the institutions, that the state, that private corporations, etc., provide the opportunity for people to show their value, their hard work, their intelligence, and that even if social differences result from this interaction, from this competition, eventually this is good for society because it is giving an incentive to everyone to be better persons, to be better individuals, and this is what drives social progress. The left, in contrast, they believe that this fair competition is a myth, that it doesn't exist, that there are people that from birth they were not given the opportunities to participate fully in the benefits of society, that they didn't have the same opportunities to go to school, for instance, to have family support and that kind of thing. And therefore, they would insist not in the quality of opportunities, but in substantial equality of results. Moving on, uh, the notions of equality are better explained in the second slide. For the right, equality means opportunity. For the left, equality means substantial result. Um, and the bottom line of this differentiation is that the right believes that inequality is natural, right? That we are all different because of our different life circumstances, and therefore it would be not only uh, illusory but also bad for society to pretend that we can all be equal. Left, in contrast, believe that equality is possible, that if only the collective, the whole society would work together towards eliminating the obstacles that are in the way of full achievement of our potential, and let us be on a more even footing. Elaborating a little further, the right tends to be pessimistic about the human nature. The right believes that we are trapped in time and space, that we cannot really understand everything that is going on in the world, and therefore we need to be humble. We need to, uh, uh, just adapt the institutions that were inherited from the past. There is a reason why those institutions are there in the first place, and we cannot understand society because reason is not enough. The human reason is not strong enough to make sense of society. Also, they have a different idea of what the the person is. They think that we are as human beings are selfish, individualistic, competitive. So it is necessary to have some type of institutions that constrain that selfishness in order to make society work. The left is almost a mirror image of that thing because they have a more optimistic view of human beings. They think that we are good by nature from the moment we are born, that we are endowed with reason, and reason expressed in science is able to grasp reality and change reality, transcend. Sorry, I made a typo there. Is transcend space and time. Therefore, we can use reason to organize social relations and politics, the economy, society. The left believes in social engineering in a way that the right would reject. And they believe that in order for this goodness that we have as human beings to be deployed, institutions need to uh, get rid of the corruption of accumulation of power, of wealth, of property. Otherwise, um, that goodness is going to be restrained. So, as you um, can or may have already guessed, the intellectual father of the right is Thomas Hobbes, and his idea that we are in a society where we have to compete all the time, take care of ourselves, otherwise, never, no one will. And the state is there, to protect our property, to protect our life. And on the left, the intellectual father is Rousseau, this 18th century philosopher that believed that, through education, every person is able to be perfected, that we live in a social contract where um, the state is going to guarantee our rights and protect us and let us be the good people that we are. Um, uh, there you go. This is kind of the basic idea. Also, the the left and the right, as a consequence of all those. I made another typo there. I'm trying to fix it. The idea that the right and the left have on the role that the state should play is very different. For the right, the state's main duty is to preserve pacific coexistence among individuals, maintain order and stability, enforce the law, protect private property, etc. Even if, for that to happen, force has to be used. And this is the essential function of the state. For other things, the state has to remain outside of social relations and be as small as possible. The left, in contrast, believe that the state has to play an active role in creating the mechanisms to ensure substantive equality for all, such as distributive programs, progressive taxation, affirmative action in the workplace, etc. So I wonder if that distinction, the way I presented it, is clear. Um, so we can move on from here. Oops. Okay, so those are the extremes, the left and the right. And in the middle, as I shown in the graph that I hope you had the time to copy, take a picture, etc. Right in the middle, we find liberalism. That is also a very strong ideology. I would say this is the prevalent ideology in the Western world. We find a definition of ideology on page 354 in our textbook. Again, on the margin. Liberalism, an ideology that emphasizes individual freedoms, representative democracy, and the market economy. So it is, in other words, the most common and perhaps the less noticeable ideology in the West. It is the default ideology, I might say, in the West that as many people have in the back of their minds, adopt without even realizing it is an ideology. But it is it is not the only or the most valuable or the superior way of interpreting our place in politics. Is only one of them. So liberalism is based on four principles. The first one is that individuals are the center of political life. Second principle is that citizenship is what relates individuals to the state. Third principle is that representative democracy is the best system of government with constitutional limits in order for the state not to abuse the citizens' rights. And capitalism is the ideal way to organize the economy. So we can see liberalism contains a little bit of the two assumptions in the left and the right. And this, in the first place, because it is based on individuals, it kind of buys into the idea of the right that competition is the driver of progress, the driver of invention, etc. That it is also reflected in the fourth principle of liberalism. Capitalism is the ideal way of organizing the economy. However, when we look at the idea of rights that is contained in liberalism that are to be protected from state interference and the idea of representative democracy with constitutional limits, it is closer to the left in the sense that it tries to limit the scope of state activity in order to protect individuals and their right to be happy, to thrive. So there are, as you saw in the graph, variations or kind of in between positions in those between the liberalism, the left, and the right. and we're going to start with the most important ones. The first one is socialism. Socialism that is in between the left, pure left, and liberalism is the most important version. There are many versions of socialism, but the most important is based on the ideas of Karl Marx. We discussed a little bit the assumptions of those ideas when we were talking about the concept of class or class-based approaches at the beginning of the course, at the beginning of the term. Uh, but let's just repeat for clarity's sake that socialism believes that the main problem in a social life is the appropriation of the means of production in the hands in few hands. And the problem with capitalism is that the system exploits the worker. Exploit a worker doesn't mean just paying less than minimum wage. It means a more kind of sophisticated mechanism of private appropriation of the social effort, thanks to the differential between the salary and the surplus. In other words, to put it in simpler terms, the value that we create as workers, right, as employees of a given company, is higher than the salary, than the wage that we are paid for creating that value. And the difference is appropriated by the employer, right? Otherwise, it would make sense to hire people if there is no uh, uh, earnings. There are no earnings to be made by the employer. This is the basic principle of capitalism, and we accept it as it is. Um, but this is kind of the problem from the socialist perspective, that something that is created collectively, that is created by some by workers, by wage workers, is appropriated privately by the owners of the corporation or of the company. For socialism, the only solution is to take over the state, through either pacific or even revolutionary means, and nationalize or control the state controlling all the areas of production, and abolish private property, because private property is kind of the beginning of the problems. And this has a lot to do with Rousseau's thinking, that thought that the origin of inequality is private property. From the moment that you allow some people to own some land, or own uh, uh, the means of production, machines that are going to produce uh, goods or services, then you allow for the gaps between the people to appear, and therefore inequality increases. So socialism believes in that capitalism is the source of our problem, is the main threat to democracy, the main threat to the well-being of the majorities, and therefore the state needs to take charge of that, needs to replace capitalism to allow for the collective management of the economy. Of course, this way of thinking gives enormous power to the state, and by reflection to those who manage the state. As you know, throughout the 20th century, many revolutions were inspired in this ideology, including, of course, the Russian Revolution and the Chinese Revolution that we discussed when we talked about the Skocpol reading, uh, when we were discussing the origins of states. Because socialism was giving kind of a recipe for change to those countries that lived in a state of profound, deep inequality, such as Russia and China. And discussion whether it was successful or not is very long, very controversial. So we won't go into that. But the main idea of those revolutions was to sort of replace capitalism by state management in order to fight against inequality and injustice. So that is socialism. But as you can see, in between socialism and liberalism, we find something that is called social democracy. Social democracy is very much what we have here in Canada under the party label, the New Democratic Party. What do they stand for? The New Democratic Party stands for capitalism with a human face, or with social consciousness. They believe in uh, private property. They believe in capitalism, as long as there is a good and efficient state management of the economy, that there is a control of corporate behavior, where corporations, especially large corporations, are uh, uh, asked to contribute with taxes. Wealthier people have uh, higher tax rates, and uh, there is of course, a well-developed welfare state where average people, workers, receive benefits from the state. So if you notice this idea of the state as equalizer of inequalities, that is very much part of the definition of the left, is present in social democracy, and yet they believe in capitalism. It is kind of a mitigated version of socialism, or a more leftist version of liberalism, if you will, depending on the perspective. On the other side, on the side of the right, we find a concept that is another ideology, that is the fascism. Fascism, as implemented in Italy and in Germany before the Second World War, mostly, but also in other countries such as Spain, such as Portugal, um, is the organization of society along corporations. Actually, the name of this ideology, fascism, come from the Italian word fascist. If you look at your textbook on page 356, there is an image of a demonstration of neo-fascists in Italy, and they are displaying a banner with Benito Mussolini, the fascist leader, and those weird things on the sides. Those weird things are bunches of uh, arrows attached to an axe, and that was a symbol of the Roman Republic. Those bunches of arrows were the fascists, meaning that when you have different groups of society tied together, the society gets stronger. That was anyway the belief in that ideology. So what they mean by the fascists then is that people are grouped along functional groups under the guidance and arbitration of the state as representative of the nation as a whole. Functional groups means that there was an organization for the farmers, an organization for industrial workers, an organization for owners of industrial companies, an organization for students, for the military, and so on and so forth. So you belong to organization according to your place in society, place in production, place in the economy, and that organization is the sole channel to bring your participation, your concern, your interests to the center of the state. The center of the state is represented by a leader, usually a charismatic leader, that makes the calls for the country as a whole. In this uh, representation, the collective is more important than the individual, as you may imagine, and the state goals are a priority over individual choices that people can make. In fascism, the economy is directed by the state. So, uh, funny here that socialism also believes in the state direction of the economy, but in fascism, it is made in alliance with business, uh, specifically the corporation, the fascists representing business, but always under the directive of the state. As you may imagine, fascism is an ideology that is not very good for democracy and human rights because human rights are not important here. What matters is group representation. What matters is the strength of the state, uh, unity of purpose, unity of direction, and therefore uh, there is an emphasis. Historically, this has been the case on ethnic nationalism to decide who belongs to the state, who is an authentic or a legitimate member of the state, and what is to be expected from people who belong to this definition of the state. Okay, moving on to other um, kind of in between ideologies. Let's go back to our slides where we are going to find a discussion on the definition of neoliberalism. I believed it was an important thing to add because um, it is a term, it is a concept that is very commonly used in our uh, other lectures, especially when they refer to globalization. And as you can see, neoliberalism is an ideology that was created in the late 1930s, but that started being predominant in global politics in the late 1970s. So neoliberals believe that the liberal order, so the values for which liberalism stands, are the result of the deliberate action of states. Neoliberalism is neo because they don't believe in the invisible hand of the market to uh, stabilize the economy, to distribute uh, efficiently the resources in a society. They think that the state has a stronger role to play for regulation, for law enforcement, um, because law creates a framework where freedom is possible. The idea of freedom is, of course, mostly economic freedom, the freedom of companies to invest, to create new business opportunities, the freedom of individuals to consume, to vote, if you will, with their purchasing habits, what corporations are to survive and what and which ones can't. Uh, However, neoliberalism also believes that the state has to limit itself to defend those principles, not give orders. So the civil society and the market have to make those decisions. The state is only kind of the regulator, has to create only the framework where this competition is going to thrive. And therefore, economic freedom is more important than political freedom. Uh, Freedom, according to neoliberalism, is the capacity for realization of individual wants and desires, the ability of individuals to do as they please in economic activities. And neoliberals don't like democracy because they say that it is a mechanism that can empower the state to go beyond its mandate, this ideal mandate, and also it may sort of be captured by the masses and make it act in a way that is contrary to the economic good of society. So this is why I found this cartoon very funny, very interesting. Uh, that is a kind of a graphic representation of neoliberalism when taken to the extremes. What matters the most is the market, the the abilities of markets to distribute the resources and create the growth, and the human suffering that it may provoke is not important, because of course, being a right wing ideology, for them, for neoliberals, sorry, inequality is natural, is necessary, inevitable, and it's actually a good thing for the improvement of society. Wonder if uh, it was clear. If you need me to go back to one of these concepts, one of these ideologies, you can, of course, send a message at any point, and I will be happy to. I'll go back to any of these. Finally, the two remaining um, concepts, conservatism and Christian democracy, are variations of uh, liberalism that are tilting towards the right. Conservatism is an old ideology that was created in the 18th century by Edmund Burke, a British philosopher and member also of the Tory party in Britain, that allies this belief, or this pessimistic belief on human nature, to and a restraint of human activity in the conduction of society, to kind of a reverence for the institutions that were inherited from the past, the customs that were created by our ancestors, and therefore a strong opposition to social change, revolutions, reforms, social engineering, and all that. Just a footnote: the Conservative Party of Canada used to be conservative until the early 2000s, but when it merged with the so-called Canadian Alliance, it became more of a neoliberal party. Even if it's called conservative, when we look at the platform of that party and their main priorities, etc., it is mostly neoliberal party rather than classic conservative party. Same thing can be said also to the UCP here in Alberta, of course. And Christian democracy is something that we don't find here in Canada. It is mostly a European creation that has had quite a bit of electoral success in countries such as Italy and Germany. It is, if you will, a humanistic version of the right uh, that is combining social conservatism, the belief in the religious traditions, in the values of Christianity, allied with belief in private enterprise, a belief in the role of a strong state for establishing stability, and leaders such as Angela Merkel, they belong to this political tradition. So it combines in a very a strange way elements of the right and the left in their policy decisions and their everyday politics. So again, if you have any questions, any comments, this would be the time to make. All right, let's say a word about other group of ideologies that have nothing to do with the left-right uh, uh, dichotomy that I presented before, but that are nonetheless very important in politics, that have shown over time, in history even, that they are very influential in shaping the way politics moves, and that is religion. Um, so the modernization theory that we discuss here, Hassan presented on it. Um, Modernization theory was expecting that religion will disappear from public life to the extent that the expansion of rational values that modernization theory is assuming will happen to every society um, will sort of relegate the religion to history. It would be a private matter, not a public matter, and therefore, modernization dismiss religion as an important uh, element in politics. Okay, Sonny just asked a question. Trumpism is an American right wing phenomenon, but does it align more traditional conservatism or Christian democracy? Well, neither of those. Uh, uh, I wouldn't put certainly not put Trump in the case of traditional conservatism or Christian democracy. Um, the way I would characterize Trump is differently with a concept that we haven't discussed in class or in this lecture, which is populism. Uh, Trump is a version of what is called the right wing populism, and this is a better kind of way to characterize his ideas. Let me explain a little bit what populism is. Populism is um, an ideology that artificially divides a society in two groups. There is the elite, those who control, those who have the power and the privilege, and there is the people, right? So, uh, leaders and parties that endorse the populist ideas believe that the role of politics or their task ahead is to empower the people, give the power back to the people by eliminating the privilege, by eliminating the advantages that the elite has had over time. And this implies, of course, kind of rethinking the state, rethinking the way the rules in politics work. And uh, the interesting thing is that populism can adopt a left wing or a right wing flavor. And we can see that happening right now in the United States with two important figures in the upcoming elections this year: Donald Trump on the one side, on the one hand, and Bernie Sanders on the other hand. Donald Trump is saying that there is an elite that is the Washington swamp, those politicians, entitled politicians that have been there forever, that they don't care about this state of the country. They are kind of not very concerned about unemployment, about uh, the interests of the average American, and therefore the task ahead, and that was at the very least his platform when he was elected in 2016, was to drain the swamp. He put it that way, and take the concerns of unemployed average workers in the United States into account. So there was this artificial division. There is the elite, the politicians, and those who benefit from the undue distribution of power and benefits from the center of, of power, and give it to the people. Take put the common person at the center of policy making. That is a right wing populism, focusing on the state, trying to shrink the state, make it more, uh, reduce the state to a minimal role of preserving stability, protecting the country, and um, strengthening the defenses, uh, and the nationalism to protect the interests of the United States. On the other hand, we have Bernie Sanders that also makes this type of symbolic division, imagined division between in the U.S. society between an elite and the people. But for Bernie Sanders, the elite is the corporate elite, the 1%, those who benefit from government largesse, who have been at the top of the social uh, scale for a long time, that are not paying taxes or giving decent salaries to their workers. So in Bernie's program, the idea is to, restrict the power of this elite, uh, make them pay taxes, make them be more socially responsible, and in a way to uphold the needs and the interests of the people. Things like universal health care that he's proposed, he's constantly been proposing, um, giving a break to students by eliminating or making it easier for them to pay their loans, making education, higher education, more accessible, creating programs of support to the regions that are more depressed in the country, and so on and so forth. So I wonder if I sort of transmitted this idea that the populism divides symbolically society into elite and people, but the way they do it can be done in a right wing way, such as Donald Trump did, or in a left wing way, such as Sanders is doing, and therefore they can serve the purposes of a right wing or a left wing program. I wonder if Sonny, I wonder if that kind of answers your question. I wouldn't put certainly not Trump in the social conservative side, traditional conservatism, or Christian democracy. Now, Justina has another question here. If CPC is neoliberalism, where would you place the former progressive conservatives? Where the former progressive conservatives were actually closer to the traditional conservatives. You're giving me the opportunity to expand on some of these concepts that I really like, because we don't always have the opportunity to do that kind of exploration. Traditional conservatism is closer to progressive conservatives. Why is that? Because the traditional conservatives, following Edmund Burke's example, believe in society as being like a living organism, that where each part of society plays the role of an organ, right? So if, for instance, farmers produce the food that makes a society live, it's like the digestive system. If there is um, a church that, takes care of our um, profound needs for meaning, for affection, etc., well, that is the heart. And if there is a system of communication, it is the feet, etc. But of course, at the top of this kind of organic metaphor that they use, there is the brains, the ones that lead the whole society, that is represented by, government, by uh, those who make the decisions, elected officials, and in the original formulation of traditional conservatism, by nobility and the monarchy. So, in this traditional conservatism, it is assumed that you cannot pretend that the peasants, being kind of the digestive system, play the role of the brains. That would be absurd. Uh, that the industrial workers that are kind of the working force of a given society, representing the hands, they cannot play the role of the brains either. You need to leave each group of society play their ideal role, instead of pretending that governments can be led by peasants or by workers or by the church. Uh, so this kind of very clear division of society in different strata is very much part and parcel of the right wing thinking. However, traditional conservatism also believed in the duty or the responsibility of the elites vis-a-vis the non-elites. So, for instance, if there is, like right now, an emergency, an epidemic, uh, the brains, the leaders of society have the social and even the moral duty to um, provide for the needs of the needier, provides for the betterment of their living conditions. Uh, uh, in if they want to keep their role of being the leaders of society. It is an ethic of kind of responsibility, social responsibility towards the people who need that. Let's remember, for instance, that the first healthcare, universal healthcare that was created in Canada was created by a progressive conservative government, um, and in the 1940s, and that was understood as being something that needed to be done in times of crisis, that needed to be done in order to compensate for failings of the market or problems that we may encounter in our lives. So it was, if you will, uh, uh, conservatism with a social consciousness, similar to what I discussed with a social democracy, like a liberalism with a consciousness, or capitalist socialism, if you will. Um, One of those kind of in between ideologies that are closer to the right, but not quite uh, uh, to the extremes. Wonder if this is a bit clearer, Justina. Okay, let's move on. Okay, you're welcome, Justina. Let's move on with religion. Contrary to what modernization theory was assuming, I said religion did not only survive, but it thrived in the world. First century, a very strong um, political force in the world. Let's be clear: religion is not necessarily political. Actually, most of religions, most religious practitioners um, don't do religion because they are interested in politics, but for something perhaps more meaningful. Uh, Religion is a way to give meaning to life and death, for that matter, to answer the most complex questions about the world and about ourselves. Uh, but when that religion is used for political purposes, it creates a very delicate, if not explosive mix. Why is that? Because from the moment someone sees their political positions as a reflection of their religious beliefs, trouble starts because their existential view is at stake. In other words, when you use religion as the basis for a political ideology, um, you cannot accept that other ideologies, other political actors tamper with those beliefs because they are so deep seated, they are so essential to you that there is no possibility for compromise. And unfortunately, some leaders, political leaders, have understood the power of religious convictions for political mobilization, and they have not hesitated to promote the political use of religion. Religion, therefore, becomes a non negotiable ideology that becomes quite explosive, quite toxic uh, in politics. Of course, we're talking not just about the religion inspired movements such as the Iranian Revolution, such as ISIS, such as the Taliban, but also about the Christian right in the United States or the militant Pentecostal churches in Brazil or in other parts of the world for that matter. So this is not exclusive to one single religion. There are militant religions all over the world, and they, they become particularly difficult to treat, particularly toxic, as I put it, because any concession means like betraying your own deep convictions, and therefore they become very extreme political ideologies. We find this type of thought in Islam, this type of thought in Christianity, and up to very recently, I thought that Buddhism was exempt from this radicalism, from this kind of blending with politics thing. But what is happening in Burma, justifying this expulsion of the Rohingya on the basis of religious differences has proven me wrong, unfortunately. Buddhism can also be used as a basis for exclusion. The religious wars in India and Pakistan started very early on. This is what, by the way, was the basis of the separation of Pakistan from India after independence. So, religion is still today a very strong and powerful force in politics as a non-negotiable ideology. Fortunately, the democratic norm usually defends the separation of religion and the state. This is part and parcel of liberalism that is prevalent in the West, as I have mentioned many times. And this is the case in most states that there is a legal separation of the state and religions, any religions. This may take two forms. The first one, the laicist state, where religion is pushed to private life and the state prevails for all public matters. This is the model that prevails in France, in Latin America, and former socialist countries. So there is the public sphere, that is the state, and then there is a private sphere where you can practice religion if you want, but there is no kind of connection between the two. That is the laicist state model. And then there is the other model, which is the denominationalism, where churches uh, are able to participate in politics, are able to compete uh, with one another, to engage in public life, to do politics, as long as they respect pluralism and all religions. They are able to compete and with one another to attract faithful people, and in a kind of a market of ideas, market of beliefs. If they are good at convincing other people, then they are legitimate competitors. So this is what happens, I believe, in this current uh, misunderstanding between Quebec and the rest of Canada regarding this new legislation that was passed in Quebec regarding what they called state neutrality. Uh, Quebec, influenced strongly by France, of course, believes in this kind of radical separation between uh, the state and any church, whereas the rest of Canada is closer to the denominationalism system. So where the participation of churches in politics and public life is accepted and even encouraged. Therefore, there is this big misunderstanding between those two parts. Okay, there are some questions here. Scarlett asked, but what about Poland's PIS and Hungary's Fidesz, where church and state are beginning to merge? Well, those Parties that we're mentioning, Scarlett, were originally similar to Trump's right wing populism. And one of the things that Trump had used, to make his populist appeal stronger is to uh, kind of use some symbols of the Christian right in his country in order to gather more support. And this is, I believe, what those parties in Poland and Hungary are doing now, trying to define in a, uh, the people with an ethnic nationalist template in mind. You might remember ethnic nationalism appeals to history, traditions, values, beliefs, etc., that are part of a given country. So so yes, they are doing that in order to better manipulate the people, in order to better differentiate who is really Polish from the who really belongs to the Polish people, as opposed to uh, immigrants or people who are newcomers to the country, or people who are not considered to be real members of the nation. And the same thing is in Hungary. This is a very dangerous, a very dishonest thing to do in politics, uh, because it leads to divisions, it leads to hatred, and hopefully I'm wrong, but it may lead to confrontation and exclusion. But to the extent that it works, these unscrupulous leaders are using it, uh, this kind of ethnic nationalism, extreme ethnic nationalism, to encourage or to make their support grow. John Weil asked another question on the merge of Republican and Christian evangelism in the United States. Well, it was an expression of what I was saying: the use of religion for promoting a given political um, perspective, so to supporting a political party. Let me, well, because there is a question here, let me make a little bit of history here. Um, there were, because the United States is under the second model of the denominationalism, there were periodical interference of different churches in public life in the United States. This is something that has been a constant in the history of that country. But the main eruption, the strong uh, partisan participation of the Christian churches in support of a major party started in the 1980s, late 1970s, early 1980s, with the creation of what is called the moral majority. This evangelical pastor, Pat Robertson, his name, supported um, Ronald Reagan's candidacy uh, by using all the kind of the strength that he had as a religious leader, and in exchange for, of course, the assurances of Ronald Reagan that he would, abide by the priorities of these churches, such as, you know, pro-life, so restricting abortions, uh, against the rights of gay people, um, and overall, enhance and legitimize the messages coming from the churches. So this moral majority thing that was created in 1979 became a very powerful support of for the Republican Party. It was, if you will, a marriage of convenience, um, because before that the creation of the the moral majority, the the Republicans were not particularly close to any or religion or any church in particular. But it worked so well that the, the the experience was not only repeated but also enhanced with the creation of what was called the Christian Coalition 10 years later. That was also uh, one of the drivers of the Republican vote in many areas of the United States. They tapped on, you know, uh, religious believers that in many occasions were kind of single issue voters, what is called, that they were only endorsed candidates that were, say, against abortion. The rest didn't matter. The rest, if they had an economic platform that was not good for their country or their region, if they had uh, uh, foreign policy platform that was not good for the United States, it didn't matter. What they wanted is to bring in more candidates that were in favor of their religious convictions. This is what I called a minute ago a non-negotiable ideology. There is no room for negotiation. There is no room for compromise because there is only one priority in mind. And this is why I repeat: when you mix religion and politics, you can only have extreme views. You can only have confrontation and manipulation of those beliefs for political gain. Okay, any other question here? Well, let me then proceed to the example. The example I want to share with you is also to be found in our um, e-class page. In that in that section of ideology, just click on the World Values Survey that is there. Is the link working? My link worked very well, so I'm going to continue, assuming that you will be able to see it. Okay, so the World Values Survey is a very important initiative that was launched in the early 1980s, 1981 to be more precise. Sorry, by US based political sociologist called Ronald Inglehart. Ronald Inglehart had um, interest in tracking the changes of values, the changes of the different things that inform people's behavior, people's activities in politics over extended periods of time. And as you can see in the website, uh, following the first comprehensive survey that was made in 1981, there have been successive um, surveys made to the point where there are now seven surveys or waves, as the website calls it, of different of people being polled, people being asked about their values, etc. So there is on the right hand side of the portal of the presentation page um, a graph that is called Inglehart Wessel's cultural map. So click on it, please. And before you put the YouTube thing to play, let me explain how is the map read. First of all, you have to notice that there have been uh, dozens of countries. It is a survey that has uh, that is comprised most countries around the world, with the support of local researchers, local comparative political researchers. that apply basically the same questionnaire to their people in order to determine with specific questions where people stand in two different axes: the traditional rational values axis, and the survival and self-expression values axis. So traditional in traditional values means that people are more attached to um, their, well, I don't want to repeat what the obvious, but to their traditions, to their culture, to their ancestors, to their language, to their history. It is a little bit the idea of the ethnic nationalism that we discussed, that they define themselves in reference to their upbringing, in reference to their language, their distinctiveness as a country. And this is how they define also their loyalty to the existing institutions. They respect, for instance, the local authorities because they are hereditary, or they prefer a monarchy over elected president because they believe that there's a wisdom of the past that has been inherited, and so on and so forth. On the other extreme, the secular rational values believes that authorities are the result of you know the choices of the majority, the collective wisdom that is applied in through kind of open and transparent means such as voting, and that over time these uh, secular rational values will create societies that are more focused uh, on the law, on, uh, on what is right for everyone rather than what that was inherited from the past. This is the vertical axis, traditional versus secular. And if you can see, if you scroll down a little bit, countries such as Qatar, Ghana, uh, Colombia, Ecuador, Trinidad are closer to the traditional definition of things, of their state, whereas countries such as Japan, Sweden, Finland, Estonia, Lithuania, etc., are closer to the secular rational values uh, edge of the axis. On the horizontal axis, you have the survival versus self-expression values. What Engelhardt and the other members of this research team mean is that when a society has survival values, they are more interested into physical safety, into their state protecting their physical integrity, into um, worrying more about the ability of everyone to get the essentials for for life, such as a roof over their heads, such as food on their table, and they don't care very much about other things such as democracy, such as participation, such as preservation of the environment, such as animal rights, etc. It is about, the word says it all, about surviving, about giving everyone the tools to uh, make a living, and the rest doesn't matter. Whereas in the other extreme, self-expression values refers to uh, what is also called the post-material values. People who say, well, I don't mind very much if I have a lower salary, but the job that I make has to be fulfilling. I don't care if a company is going to increase the gross national product of my country, but I'm more concerned about that uh, company to protect the environment and respect the workers' right. and that type of thing. As you can see in this axis, in the survival uh, edge, you find countries such as Tunisia, Moldova, Bulgaria, Ukraine, Morocco, etc. And on the self-expression values, the postmodern values, you find countries such as Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, and Canada, right? So if you put those two measurements that are, as you may imagine, the aggregate, the quantitative aggregate of many indicators to create an index, what we have called an index in our methodology, the countries are located in very different parts. So, for instance, if you take Sweden on the upper right hand side of your screen, that it is in that situation because it has both a very secular rational approach. People in that country have a very strong secular rational approach to life, but they also prefer self-expression values. But if you compare to Canada, we are less rational, but we have pretty much the same type of self-expression values as Sweden does. Let's take another example. If you take Japan, they are in between the survival and self-expression values, but they are more advanced in terms of uh, rational values than, say, Hong Kong. Hong Kong is more attached um, to tradition than Japan, although it doesn't really compare to other countries such as Slovakia or Portugal that are even more traditional. So, uh, you know, by putting together the countries according to their kind of cultural origins, um, Engelhardt and the other people in this crowd were able to create these kind of maps, uh, grouping the countries and even track how they have evolved over time. Now you can play the cultural map. There's a YouTube thing that you have at the top of that page, and as you can see, countries migrate. They change over time. They don't remain stagnant, and this is manifestation of generational change, cultural change over time that shows that values are not there once and forever, but that can change over time. Let's do that again and track this time Canada. Canada, let me try to find it, is in the middle of the English speaking uh, group, the green, kind of dirty green uh, area. And as you can see, it is pretty close to traditional values. Uh, on definitely on the secular, sorry, in the self-expression value side of things, but over time it changes. It moves more to the rational, secular rational, and more to the self-expression of values. So I'm making it play again, so you can see how Canada plays, first goes up, up, up to rational, and then to the right to the more self-expression things, ending in 2014 as one of the most self-expression countries in the world. So this research that was launched almost 40 years ago now is a good example of how values, ideologies, the things that we have in our head can be important tools for comparing countries, for comparative politics um, studies. And I encourage you to look into the details of how the different rankings for the countries were made, the participants that are a part of this World Values Survey effort. So you can see that once again, it is a tool that comparative political scientists are used, that is available for free online, that is a good example of how values is a good way to understanding what is going on in different societies. Okay, so we've been here for a while and some people have left. I wonder if the 8 people who are still here have any questions or any other thing to comment or add. Well, we'll meet again 1 week from now. I tried to provide an overview of everything that was of the readings that were assigned for today and on Thursday. But if you have again any questions, let me know. Let the SA know, and we're expecting your uh, assignments by email. We'll grade them and provide feedback by email as well. So just keep looking. So I'll see you then 1 week from now, Tuesday, March 31st at 11 a.m. And let us know if you have any questions or any comments. So take care, stay safe, and see you soon. Bye.